I thought I would make a short video to cover the 10 slides that I have created to help you with the proposal assignment. This comes from chapter 10 in our textbook, Reading Critically, Writing Well. When we talk about proposals, sometimes we tend to think first of marriage proposals, and you can see the different kinds of marriage proposal images that I have here. I also put in, just in case you were wondering, how much it costs to propose to your significant other at different baseball stadiums. And you can see that if you go to LA to the Dodgers, it's going to cost you $2,500, whereas if you stay here in St. Louis with the Cardinals, the world's greatest baseball team, it's only going to cost you $500. Some are cheaper. The Cubs in particular stand out here at $175. And then of course we can go down here and look at our other arch enemy, the Reds, and we can see only costs $50 to get to make a proposal in their stadium. I don't know what this means, but just in case you decide that you want to have a proposal ceremony at a ballpark, you can at least figure out what it's going to cost you. This is the second of 10 slides. This is a list of tasks. This is kind of how to lay out the writing of your proposal. The first thing you're going to have to do, of course, is to read the essays in the textbook and then look at the sample essays that I've put on Blackboard. And then after that, you can start thinking about what problem affects you in particular that you think could be fixed. One of the examples that I used a couple years ago that I've posted some sample essays from are students here at Merrimack who decided that they wanted to change things. There's a sample essay about academic advising. There's another sample essay about how to handle international students. There's even another proposal for concealed carry at Merrimack, which some of you might find interesting. So the first thing is you've got to choose a problem. And it could be specific to the college, or it could be a problem that you've always been concerned about. The second step, of course, is to research the problem and solutions, decide how to present it so that readers see it exists and that it is a serious problem and a serious solution, that it's worth their time. Then you have to find a solution that you think will help solve the problem without being too costly or take too much time. You have to consider objections, and that may be complicated depending on what your particular proposal might be. And then the final step, of course, is organizing the proposal so that it appeals to your audience in terms of the way that it's organized. So here's the steps. Choose and analyze the problem. Prove that the problem exists. This will probably require some research on your part, unless it comes from personal experience here at Merrimack, and you can find perhaps some other students or even some of your classmates who might have experienced similar problems. You've got to consider your audience. Who exactly is this going to go to? I know that when I've had students write in the past about Merrimack problems, they thought very carefully about audience and decided it's the Dean of Student Success or it's the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the district level. It could be the Chancellor of the community college. And you can go to our website and find these folks and get a little bit of an idea of who they are, what they look like, and perhaps that will help you narrow your focus down to an audience. You have to determine a tentative solution, and you're going to have to then research and support it, as I've said before. You've got to consider alternatives. You've got to formulate a working thesis and then organize it with readers in mind. The rest of the slides are going to go into each one of these areas in a little bit more depth. How do you convince an audience a problem really exists? Well, you do the normal kinds of things that we would do. You provide some data or you provide examples. Perhaps you can find some images. If you decide that you want to approach issues that online students face at Merrimack, you could even use screenshots of our website and say, well, here's how hard it is to do X, whatever that is. I have to admit, I always find registering for classes difficult, even though I've done it dozens of times. And it might be helpful to show screenshots of the registration process just to indicate to your audience that the problem really exists. The second bullet underneath the problem is this idea of narrowing the scope to something manageable. You don't want to say, I need to fix all the online stuff at Merrimack. Maybe it's just the registration. Maybe it's just the interface with Blackboard. Maybe it's the way that classes can be found in the interactive schedule. You can pick something manageable like that. You don't need to pick something huge and enormous and complex, but something that you can manage in a few pages. The next step in the process, of course, is to consider the readers. And you may have a very specific reader in mind, like the chancellor or like the dean of student success, but you may also consider a larger group of readers, maybe the board of trustees, maybe your classmates, maybe your fellow online students, or maybe other members of other community groups or organizations that you belong to that you want to address this issue to. One of the things to think about is assume that whoever you're addressing this to has the power to make a change. That's a very powerful consideration because you're not just sending things out willy-nilly. You're not reaching this huge, broad audience that we talk about for most of your papers. You have somebody pretty specific in mind. And most of you are working people. Most of you have to work with bosses. Most of you know that approaching your boss is different from approaching a contemporary or a fellow worker or another student. And so when you want your boss to do something, you know that you have to think about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it and when you're going to present it to him or her. The same rules apply for this. Okay. Another thing to think about is that your audience is always going to be resistant, that if they want to change something, they would have, but they haven't. And so you have to figure out how to talk to them in a way that's going to help overcome that natural resistance. And I think the best way to do that is to be objective and clear and neutral. You don't want to yell at them. You don't want to say this is stupid or this is a pain or this is obviously too hard or only dumb guys would fall into this trap or something. You don't want to insult anybody. You want to be very careful and objective and clear when you want to present your case. You've also got to consider shared values. One of the things that we don't like to think, or we don't often think about, is the fact that our bosses and us have a lot in common. We both want things to work well. We both want people to feel like they're part of an organization, that they have a place, and that organization functions in a way that helps people. So assume some goodwill on both sides of the equation. Another way that you can consider your readers, and the final point on the slide, is to look at savings in time or money or other resources. Look at ways of portraying this as being simply more convenient, and perhaps that would attract your audience to this proposal. Finding a tentative solution. The first thing you have to do, of course, is do some research work. And you'll have to try to think about what other places have done that might be similar to what you want to do, okay? And then you have to be able to connect examples of problems and examples of solutions to your overall solution. Show how it can make a difference. Show specifically how shifting maybe the way that we do registration in some fashion is going to make it faster, easier, cheaper, as I've said before. And then make sure that you see it as part of a larger system. One of the issues that comes up with like our registration process is we know that a certain percentage of students will begin the process but not finish it. And we know that some of that comes from people being frustrated by the different steps. So remember that we're registering not just to register, but we're registering in order to let people access an educational experience. So your solution should be placed into a larger context, not just getting a specific task done, but how that's going to empower people or empower an organization to do something better. Researching and supporting your solution, again, like other papers you've done from this course, you're going to need two sources. And you can use the readings in our textbook if there's something appropriate there that might help you. You can, of course, use Google like we always been doing. If you pick something here on campus, you might want to pick an expert from the campus, somebody in admissions and registration, somebody in advising, someone in counseling, perhaps, or another faculty member. I can help you with that if you ask me and give me enough time to try to find you someone. But I can't guarantee that they're going to be available when you're available. That's something that the two of you would have to work out. But you're welcome to ask, okay? Another consideration here is looking for data, specific numbers. And you've got to think about how much something costs, how many people are affected, how much trouble it's going to be to change. And this may require some more complicated research on your part. And so one of the things you should do is decide your topic early, do some research work, and ask me for help if you need it. We also have reference librarians in the library who are there the whole time the building is open, and you can talk to them. You can also email them, and you can use a chat feature, and all this is available to you through the library website. And if I remember, I'll show you that at the end of this presentation. Um, a third consideration is to look for similar efforts in similar places. Chances are whatever problem you're running into has been solved somewhere else. And you should look around and see if you can find an analogous organization or an analogous problem that you can apply to your specific one. And as I've said, ask for help. I can't emphasize that enough. Don't wait till the last minute and email me or a librarian really late the day before the paper is due, because that won't do you any good at all. How do you support your solution? Think about writing, as I've said, very specific outcomes. Be precise. Understand that seeing the future is always a tricky thing. And when we're looking for the future, we always know that it's going to be unpredictable. And the best thing you can do is acknowledge that, but say, I think if we take these steps, X is going to happen. Okay. And remember, don't underpromise and don't overpromise. Looking at alternatives is always a hard part. Understand that other people have different ideas. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the status quo. Whatever we're doing right now, somebody has decided that's what we're going to do in whatever organization you're in. So understand that that status quo is really powerful. And remember that that's always the first alternative for you to consider, is what we're doing right this minute. Okay. And then you have to point out kind of how it doesn't work quite the way that people think it does. You don't have to spend a huge amount of time on alternatives, but it should be maybe a quarter, maybe a third at the most of your paper. And use them as a way of showing strengths and weaknesses in your own proposal. Okay. Here's the last slide. One of the things that you need to do relatively early on is to develop a working thesis. And our textbook discusses this on pages 460, 461. And this should give you kind of a guidepost to say, well, if I want to change something in an organization or change some procedure or policy or practice, what would that look like? And you can do that without doing any research work. And then once you use that to help you identify a solution and identify the problem, then you can start looking at the research, doing the research effort to make it all happen. And again, when we think about organization, think about putting it into this format. First part of the paper is going to state what the problem is. The second part is going to have the solution. Maybe that's the first 2 paragraphs. And then you're going to have a long support discussion about why your solution is best, and then a consideration of alternatives at the end. Let me take you now to how to get in touch with a librarian without having to physically go to the library. You click on Current Students, and we go down here and look for the libraries link, which is over here on the left. We bring up the library page. We click on Ask a Librarian, and you can see you can email questions to the librarian. You can use the chat feature. You can text them, or you can phone them. Now, you can only use the text feature when the library is open. So if you look on here, you'll find that the library hours are posted on the web page over here on the left-hand side, right here, where it says hours and location. And this will tell you which of our libraries is closest to you and when they're open and when they're closed. You just click on which one you want to use. Okay. But to go back to the Ask a Librarian feature, you have some different options. You can use an email, and if it's an email, it's going to be answered by the first librarian who gets it. It may be at Forest Park, it may be at Flow, it may be at Wildwood. Sometimes they respond on weekends, sometimes they respond at night. The chat and text features only work when the library is open. Okay, to get an immediate response. You can send them a text, but don't expect an answer until the library is open again. Okay, so in addition to visiting the library face-to-face, you can use one of these 4 tools to help you access a librarian as you need them.